All right, well,
I think we're good.
I think we're on. Can you hear us in there? All right, well, everyone, good evening and welcome to the Medfield Board of Selectmen meeting for Tuesday, April 20th, 2021, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 38, Section 18, and Governor Baker's March 15th, 2020 order placing strict limitations on the number of people who may gather in any one place. This meeting of the Medfield Board of Selectmen is being conducted via remote participation, and no in-person attendance of members of the public is permitted. However, every effort has been made to ensure that persons wishing to view the proceedings while in progress may do so. Anyone who wants to view the meeting while in progress may do so by accessing and following the instructions posted in the meeting notice. Because this is a remote meeting, all votes will be roll call votes. I will note that this meeting is being video recorded. As you could probably tell, this is not a Zoom background. We are actually here in our natural habitat in the second floor of Town Hall, just the Gus, Pete, and myself. So none of us are participating remotely, although all of you are at home. So thank you for doing that. This is our first hybrid meeting where we are here in person. Everyone else is participating online as we transition back, hopefully to just if you can mute that there, Pete, because I'm getting
trying.
No one needs to hear the meeting twice.
Try to turn the volume a little bit down.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Sorrell.
Yeah, because all three of you are physically there, you do not need to take roll call votes.
All right, well, we're going to do it anyway, Mark.
That's fine.
Just in case anyone home has a question about who voted how. There we go. All right, the echo is gone. We're back to one version of this meeting. So we'll begin by taking a moment of appreciation for our troops serving around the globe in defense of our country. Thank you. And to pick up on something that Gus did when he was chairman a couple of years ago, I would love to recognize any Medfield residents or natives who are serving our country now. I'd love to recognize them by name. We can't get that information, obviously, from the U.S. government, but if you or a member of your family is serving and would consent to be recognized at the start of a meeting, I would love to recognize by name some of the many residents of our town who are serving our country. I'll also note that this is a hybrid meeting. I don't know when we're going to be able to have members of the public back. We are working on that. I would like to do that as soon as possible once we can work through the logistics and make sure we're following the appropriate guidelines. So it may start with fully vaccinated members of the public who are able to come, and then hopefully opening up to everybody else. If we do it that way, we'll find some equitable way of parceling out the seats, because I know there will be such great interest in people wanting to come. I think everyone's been cooped up so long that even these meetings might attract some some people who want to come. I am hoping, though, that we will keep up broadcasting over Zoom even when we're able to resume fully in person. I think that a lot of people have appreciated the ability to participate via Zoom, and if we can make the hybrid logistics work out here, we'd like to do that. So just so you know what we're seeing here, Gus, Pete, and I are in the main meeting room. Christine is in her office. We have a screen up on the wall where we'll be able to see anyone who is speaking via Zoom, anyone making a presentation. So the same thing you'll be seeing at home from other participants we'll be seeing here in the room. We also each have our laptops, although maybe with the exception of Gus, I'm not sure how well Pete and I will do using them to actually participate in this meeting, but Gus is a little more technically proficient, so he may actually be able to figure it out. But we are going to be able to see everything that you are seeing and watch the presentations. And so our first appointment tonight is with the Medfield Energy Committee to discuss the two town meeting warrant articles regarding community choice aggregation and climate goals. And so I believe Bob Winograd is going to be making the presentation on behalf of the Medfield Energy Committee. So if we could get him promoted we'll hear from Mr. Winograd.
Okay, can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and so we can see you.
Terrific, thank you. Fred was going to be providing a brief introduction, but I think I'll be doing it in his stead. The subject, obviously, tonight, 2 warrant articles, community choice aggregation, otherwise known as CCA, and climate goals. Back 6 weeks or so ago, we as a committee did a presentation before the town warrant committee. Uniformly, or unanimously, I should say, all approve this set of warrant articles, and we hope we'll have the same objective and same outcome with the Board of Selectmen, you guys, this evening. In preparation for tonight, actually over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of work that Medfield Energy Committee has done, emphasizing communication with town residents. And I should really be putting up the presentation while I'm talking to you. So let me take a moment and do that, share my screen.
Okay, great. So while Bob's
Okay.
doing that, this is Fred. I did just get in. Thank you. I just want to say that this is Earth Day is this week. It's Thursday. I hope we'll be able to add another reason to celebrate. Hoping for your support tonight on these 2 articles. You'll be hearing from Bob and Hilly and Megan, who have been a great team, been working on these issues for over a year now, and just put in another large round of work just in the last day. So I look forward to Bob's presentation, then Hilly and Megan will be available for fielding any questions, and I'm here too. Thank you. Sorry, Bob.
Okay, with that said, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. Okay. There's been outreach that I was just making mention of over the last couple of years. There's a lot of material related to these warrant articles that have been put up on the Medfield website under the folder for the Medfield Energy Committee. There's also a lot of information flow that's been brought to play, and outreach forums. There are 4 of them that have been conducted to date. The 5th will be happening on May 6th. All these forums related to our 2 warrant articles. The website that you see up there is where we have a repository for these forums. They were recorded, and we hope people will take advantage of the opportunity to listen to these forums. But this has been part of our outreach, and we're hoping to do a lot more of this as we look forward to the future. Now, with regard to these 2 warrant articles, format for the evening, one of 2 formats. One is that I speak to each warrant article and then open up for questions, and we vote up or down with regard to the warrant articles, doing each of them individually. We have the option also of my presenting both warrant articles, 1 question and answer session followed by your vote on these warrant articles. If there's any preference, please say so. Otherwise, I'll choose the former.
No, go right ahead. I think if you want to go through your presentation, we'll defer our questions until the end. If there's something specific, one of us may chime in with a particular question as you go through. But why don't you go through the presentation and then we'll ask questions.
Okay, so I'll do both sides and then we'll ask questions. Okay, first of all, here's the warrant article, community choice aggregation. I'll refer to it as CCA. There's a lot of legalese in what you see presented in front of you. That's required by the Department of Public Utilities if we're going to be moving forward with the CCA program. But there is some understanding of what this represents that I need to speak to, and we'll do so now. With regard to each of these warrant articles, there's going to be definition of what the warrant article is all about, what it represents, and there's also purpose and benefit for each of these warrant articles, which I want to stress, and obviously is going to be, I'm sure, most interest to you guys. A little bit of background. All of us get Eversource bills every month. Those bills are split up into 2 pieces. One is infrastructure, things like poles, transformers, lines, that stuff. In administration, you get your bill from Eversource, you pay your bill through Eversource. The second part of the Eversource bill is called supply, and that's what we're going to be focusing our attention on now. Eversource buys power from suppliers. Eversource does not generate power and distribute it. That's a key point. They buy power. And every 6 months, Eversource goes out to bid for a contract for a 6-month period that will follow. And from that, from the acceptance of a bid, there's a base rate that Eversource charges its community that is signed up for receiving power through Eversource. That's a key point. We're going to speak now to what community choice aggregation brings to the picture. CCA is a program that allows local governments, Medfield obviously in our case, to procure, again, we're talking about buying power on behalf of its residents, all of our town members, from an alternative supplier to that of Eversource, while still receiving the services of maintaining infrastructure and billing and paying through Eversource. So Eversource will continue its infrastructure role and administrative role, but we as CCA, through the CCA program, will be seeking to procure power from an alternative source. Now, when Eversource goes out for bid, there's a state requirement that the power that comes through that bid is at least, today at least, 20% from renewable energy sources. And therefore, when we in a CCA program go out to bid equivalently, we too would be seeking a bid that represents a base rate for 20% renewable energy being part of the power that's supplied. Renewable energy is classic, hydropower, solar energy, wind energy, those kinds of sources that are renewable. In putting together a CCA program, however, we also have the option, which we can exercise, to say we want multiple rates that come back as part of a bid. Multiple rates translating to the following. There's the base rate. Eversource has to provide 20% renewable energy. What we get out of a CCA program is one of its options needs to equivalently be 20% renewable energy. But we can also seek to have options for residents to select what is referred to as an opt-up program, namely 20% plus some additional renewable power over that 20%. That may be 25%, that may be 30%. That's all to the town's determination of what those percentages should represent. So what this allows, it allows our community to select a percentage of power that's delivered that's higher in renewable power, and therefore likely to be more expensive as well for renewable power. So let me come down to the next slide and kind of hit where we're headed in terms of strategic points here. Number one, by going CCA, there's the potential savings for CCA participants. If a resident opts for the base offering that can come through a CCA program, there's a very good high probability that there will be financial savings that comes through that avenue over a period of time. And history shows us that. It's not a speculation. CCA programs that many cities and towns have had an effect over decades now show us that there are savings that come out of base rate options. Therefore, there's a high probability, though no certainty, that we'd achieve the same ends. But there's also the opportunity and towns, there's percentages in every town that opt for the higher level of renewable energy than Eversource currently supplies, which is a good thing for the town. It's a good thing for our environment in general, and that will be a topic we'll be speaking to a moment from now when we talk about climate goals. But further, there is a support for local renewable energy investments. The more we seek to have our power be sourced through green sources, the more support and the more incentive there exists out there for investments in more renewable energy becoming available. Those are the three key points. Other points of interest that I'll go through very briefly, but important to the community at large in Medfield. This is a competitive bidding process selection. We select only what's advantageous to the town. The Board of Selectmen will control that. If the board does not like an option, we do not need to select an option. DPU, Department of Public Utilities, approves any plan that we'd like to bring into action. Then they're an integral part of the process of of ultimately creating a program that we implement. Residents can opt in, can opt out of these plans. They can go back to Eversource if they'd like. They can stay in CCA if they'd like. They can opt up, they can opt down. They can do anything they want. They can go to third parties. We know that there are third parties out there. There's a small part of the population that exercises third parties for their selection of power source, not Eversource. Impact on budget billing or other payment programs, there is none. Eversource maintains them as they are today, as if you were acquiring energy through them. Solar metering credits, the same thing, no change. If I didn't mention this a moment ago, nearly half of Massachusetts cities and towns are engaged with CCA programs. We're not the first. We're well in the middle of the pack when it comes to the total number of communities within the state to be addressing our interest in a CCA program. Finally, brokers are involved with managing the process that's under DPU supervision. No cost to the town. Point of interest. That's central to realities of town budgets nowadays. Minimal oversight by town employees. At this point, I could go to questions, or I could move forward to the next article. Which way would you like to go?
Gus or Pete, do you have a preference for questions now or go to the next one?
I don't care one way or the other. Might be better to do the questions now after this one and then the subsequent ones rather than having to keep backtracking.
Right. Why don't we do that? So Pete, we'll start with you for questions on the community choice aggregation article. Does that work for you, Bob, if we do the questions now and then move on to number 2?
That's terrific.
All right, so Pete, we'll start with you.
I have no questions because I've been going to all the Energy Committee meetings and I've heard the presentations by the Medfield Environmental Action, I think it is.
Yep.
All right, well, that was easy. Gus?
And Bob, I've got questions, but you've already seen them from me, so these shouldn't be hard. The one broad question I guess I had was in terms of transitioning over to this or bringing people into the program, is this completely handled by Eversource, or do we have obligations on our side to introduce people, sign them up, do any of the administrative processing? I just want to know how it works.
So we've got Megan and Hilly ready to field questions. So Bob, if you wouldn't mind, let them jump in.
Okay, I'll let them jump in.
Good evening, everybody. It is a process that is run by the whoever we choose to be the supplier of the energy. They would have a whole customer service program and back end for it. So we wouldn't even be involved in a data transfer of any kind. It would happen between Eversource and the supplier, and then they would handle all the outreach.
Okay, and so that would both be for new residents moving into town, but initially when we'd start this up, it would be for a whole slew of residents that would be on basic service right now that at least have the option of joining this program.
Yes, everybody would get a letter addressed to them at home and told that in 30 days or whatever the amount of time is, that they would be switched over to this program, and then given that interim 30 days to either opt out, they could go back to basic service and say they don't want to participate with the town, or as Bob mentioned, either opt down for something that might be less expensive or opt up to something that might have more green energy. Those elements of that program have yet to be decided because the town, as we're building this program, gets to decide that.
Okay. And then the only other, it's an administrative question. I know the selectmen have to approve the first contract. If there's a new contract every 6 months, do the selectmen approve every 6 months, or are we approving the basic concept and then from there on, it would be the Energy Committee making the judgment, or how does that work?
Well, you might be alluding to the 6 months because that's how often every 6 months Eversource changes its basic service rate. Mm-hmm. And if we were to build a contract, we would likely build a contract that would be for maybe 2 years, 2 or 3 years. But when that contract was over, then we would have a new bid process, and then the selectmen would be asked to sign that new contract. Okay. But we would just be in this arrangement.
Okay, all right, those are my questions.
That's it. Mm-hmm. So I just have a couple of questions, Megan. First, do we need a certain percentage to stay in the program to succeed? So if we opt in, is there some percentage at which the opt-outs take us out entirely, or if people opt out and only 10% of the people remained opt-in, we're still in.
Well, we envision a program where you don't opt in, that everybody would be
On the
moved into the
opt-outs.
program and
Right.
then
Everybody's
opt out.
in.
Yeah.
It's-
And just out of,
everybody's in. How many do we lose out if people opt out?
no, there's no minimum.
Yeah, I just might add, there are a number of towns, when I said there's nearly half of the cities and towns that are engaged with CCA programs, there are many towns, half of these towns are towns that are smaller than Medfield in community size. And history shows us that virtually no town has dropped out of a program because of size of the community participating.
And then just in the bid process, I mean, how many different players are there in the market? I mean, typically, how many companies, how many power generation companies are bidding in this process?
I do not know the answer to that question. I know that there are, I believe, 3 approved brokers that we can choose between to manage the process for us, but I do not know how many suppliers they have access to.
And so is the process then that the brokers will essentially put out an RFP for a broker? We'll pick a broker, and then the broker will help us put out a request for bids for the CCA aggregation?
Yes.
So just a slight amendment to that answer is that I believe, as I understand it, the brokers, as Megan said, are already pre-approved by the state. We could, if we wanted to, go with one, or we could ask for RFPs from all 3.
By RFPs, not just an RFP to be a broker, but actual bids from potential suppliers?
No, I'm just talking about the first step is getting the broker.
Yeah, no, Megan answered that question. So we would pick a broker, and then the broker would manage the process of soliciting bids from power generation companies.
Correct.
Fred, if I understood your clarification, though, what you're saying is we can pick a broker, or it's not so much a competitive bid from the broker's standpoint, it's that we can either go with the broker we want, or if we chose, we could say, hey, we'd like all 3 of you brokers to issue RFP. The real competitive procurement, the RFP, is for the CCA energy provider, not for the broker, or did I misunderstand you?
That's correct. That's where yes, that's where we'll get the chance to find out who can provide that.
But
the energy at the best rate.
the decision on the broker is not an RFP process. I guess we could make it one if we want to. I don't know what
Correct.
brokers would compete on to choose them, but we would just decide who we want to go with. Is that correct?
Yes, I know. I know at least somewhat each of the 3, and how to choose amongst them. Nobody's made any recommendations yet.
None of them are your brother-in-law or anything, Fred?
Correct. None of them.
Or sister-in-law.
So is there an exemption from public procurement then for this brokered process?
That's I think the right term. Thank you.
Because I don't think
if you know any different, please speak up, but that's my understanding.
we're not actually paying the broker anything. This is not a contract in the sense that there's any consideration that we pay the broker, is there?
That's correct. We do not pay the broker.
Mr. Chairman, it is an exemption from 30B.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get
Thank
at.
you.
Yeah,
We can just pick one of the 3 without a process, and they're probably all basically the same.
As long as it's not Fred's brother-in-law, we
Right.
can't do that.
Well, we wouldn't punish Fred's brother-in-law for being Fred's brother-in-law. The brother-in-law can bid as well. So anyway, all right. Anything else on this? All right. So we have no further questions on that. Bob, do you want to move on to the next article?
Okay, our next article is Article 2, the Climate Goals Warrant article. There's a preamble to this warrant article, the first paragraph, and what this is stating is science tells us that the greenhouse gas content of our atmosphere has increased alarmingly from pre-industrial days, and it continues to increase alarmingly as we look into the future where more and more greenhouse gas content is being emitted into the atmosphere and more. And we've not reached the apex. It continues to increase. And as a result of that, we have science tells us, I didn't mean to say climate tells us, but climate does too in reality. But science tells us that there's climate change occurring, there's global warming, and there are impacts that are adverse. And some of them are listed in nature, what they represent. But the point is, the first paragraph relates to what science tells us. And given the reality of what science tells us, what are we going to do about it? Because the past is not going to be our future. And we need to all recognize that there's going to be change as we look forward into the future. When we buy a car in the future, it won't be the traditional gas harnessed automobile. It's going to be all electric. When we replace a gas heating system, it's not going to be just another gas heating system. Our society has to think differently than it has in the past as we look forward to the future if we're going to be able to have a chance at achieving net zero by the year 2050. So let me look at the second paragraph here. It says, therefore, the town of Medfield, the town supports a goal of eliminating or offsetting all greenhouse gas emissions originating in the town. So I'm emphasizing here the town, we're talking about Medfield. By the year 2050 or earlier. We're trying to be inclusive here in that we're saying the town of Medfield, everyone, every resident, every business, our town government needs to support the goal of eliminating greenhouse gas emissions and following the state program, which has just been approved by the governor a month ago, stating that the state is committed to achieving net zero by that time frame. So we're speaking inclusion here. So support the goal, encourage the Board of Selectmen, all town boards and committees, all residents and businesses, inclusion again, to take action and to take part in the furtherance of Medfield's climate goal by developing a net zero action plan by March 2022 that outlines specific strategies, measurable, attainable, realistic, and term targets aligned with state and federal goals and roadmaps and incentives. So obviously I'm emphasizing certain points here. The whole point about this article is let's see life as it is. There is a crisis that we are facing nationally, internationally, and we're all going to suffer if we don't take action to respond to that reality. We're trying to say that we need to be inclusive. We need to involve the whole town, all of its residents. We need to get the town government, all of its citizens on board with the reality that we need to move forward. We want inclusive engagement in developing an action plan that will include all elements of government and citizenry in developing it. Now, a strategic point here is aligned with state and federal goals. Keep that in mind. Let me move to the next page here. So net, what are we doing with this warrant article? We're affirming the state's net zero legislation. I just pointed out that legislation has been passed by the state. The governor signed that legislation. The state is coming up with goals and plans for how it'll achieve those goals. When it comes to Medfield, you might say, well, look, if the state has done all the hard work, why do we have to do anything at all? We'll just listen to what the state tells us to do. Well, the reality is the state has to consider all aspects of what the state represents. We do not have a public transportation system in Medfield that we need to be concerned with. We don't have 52-story high-rise buildings. We don't have industry that pollutes the atmosphere in the town of Medfield. What we do have, 95% of our emissions in the town of Medfield come from our residences, businesses, municipal buildings, and of course, automobiles, passenger vehicles that we all own and we all drive. 95% of our emissions come from those sources. Therefore, any plan that we put together needs to address those sources. What's relevant to us in the town of Medfield. We need to extract from what the state is proposing be done, that which is relevant to us. Now, we're not the only community that's doing this. There are 33, if I have the number correct, of 101 local communities to the 495 belt around Boston. Some 33 communities are doing the same thing that we're speaking to here tonight. Putting forth warrant articles saying that we need to develop this kind of a plan that we're speaking to. and take action to see these plans through. By the way, these plans evolve with time. They're not fixed plans from day one. As the state's priorities change, as the state's goals could potentially change, we need to recognize the reality of what the state is saying, and we need to incorporate those realities in what we have in our own plan, because some may be relevant, some may not. But we need to keep our eyes on what we need to do in our town. Strategic to our success here is community outreach. I'm talking about inclusion. I'm talking about inclusion in many manners, ways, and forms. Inclusion in developing a plan, inclusion in government saying to all of its citizens, yeah, we're on board. We need to work together on this. So outreach, engage town residents and businesses and town government, inform about options, heat pumps, solar panels, electric vehicles, and state and federal initiatives, incentives, grants. The more information flow we can get out to the community at large, working together to get that information flow out to the community at large, the better off all of our residents will be, because we can provide information about resources, about how to replace a heating system in your house, what options you have with regard to electric vehicles, other than inquiring from Consumer Reports. We want to be an information source, and we want to have goals that align with the state, and information with regard to, for Medfield's needs, how do we go about attaining those goals. As I mentioned, some 33 communities locally are engaged with the same kind of activities we're talking about. Megan and Fred have information from other towns about their plans, the content of their plans, as well as the objectives they have to develop their own plans. We will communicate, we will coordinate with other communities, because we're not doing this alone. And as well, other organizations that promote net zero opportunities. I said the plan will evolve over the course of time. Last point that I'll make reference of, or almost the last point, no financial request is tied in with this warrant article, nor is there an intent to put forth anything that's a financial request. The state may dictate otherwise, and if it does so, we'll all become obviously aware of that reality and take whatever action is going to be necessary as an output of it. I'll mention one other thing. 72, it's the fourth bullet down, 72% of 504 responses to an MEA fall survey supported Medfield adopting the climate goals and developing a plan to lead us in that direction. So with all that said, again, outreach, these are community, this is obviously one of the important avenues we'll continue to pursue. There are public forums that extend beyond the ones that I have listed here that have been conducted already. They're up on the website that relate to how we can make a home, by way of example, be a net zero contributor to emissions.
But we up for Q&A?
Question and answer.
Great, and I think Hilly might lead the any questions that come up. Is that right, Hilly?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me here. So I'm open for questions if you have any comments or questions on that article.
Great, thank you, Hilly. We'll start with Pete.
No questions, Hilly, but I have a couple comments. I think both these articles are important to the town, and I support them both. The community choice aggregation is going to get us hopefully lower electricity rates in town, and also be good for our carbon footprint of the town. Clearly, it's important, if we're going to get to net zero by 2050, that we establish that as a goal and then start planning as to how we're going to get there. So I think that this is a critically important article for the town. Thank you for putting it forward.
Thank you, Pete. Gus?
So this is better than normal. Pete and I are 50% in agreement, at least, on the community, on the aggregation article. I also, and Megan Sullivan gets credit, lead credit at least, for winning me over several months ago when I initially came in with some skepticism about the mechanics, and Megan and I talked And based on our discussion, I am in support of that article. So 1 out of 2 is not bad for us, Pete, sometimes. Hilly, let me start with a question. What's the purpose of this article? What are you hoping to achieve?
Well, thank you for that question. Clearly, this is an article we put forward to town meeting because this, as a legislative body of the town government, we hope to establish a strategic goal for the whole town that will focus the effort both of town government, of all bodies of town government, as well as the residents and the businesses in town to achieving that goal. We also think that by bringing it to town meeting, we have the opportunity to introduce it to a larger audience that would normally not necessarily be exposed to this goal, and that enables the town residents to, really make a statement about how they feel about this.
So let me tell you why I asked the question. I have an aversion to symbolic, empty statements that don't actually involve commitments. It may make people feel good about what they're saying, and they can look around and cite other towns that are doing the same thing. But they don't necessarily lead to action. They don't actually really dig in. Why not have the Energy Committee put that plan together that you're asking for approval on? And when you have that plan that really lays out what the implications of this are, bring that before the town meeting to say, here's what we think we should do, here's what it costs, here's what we need you to do, and we'd like your endorsement of that. Wouldn't that be a better way to actually move ahead? You don't need anybody's approval as an energy, certainly, I'm only speaking for myself, but I'm pretty sure the selectmen would encourage you to do it. And so I'm not making these comments in opposition to the idea of doing it. I'm making the comments because I find this to be one of these symbolic acts that often occur that don't actually really lead to anything.
Thank you. That is a really great comment, and we have discussed that extensively. Of course, the Energy Committee could go out and write a plan. There are other towns that have already done a plan, and it would be an easy thing for us to just go out, take bits and pieces of their plan and put it together and have a plan ready. However, this would not lead to the action that we all think we need to do, not only in the town, but statewide that needs to be done, and that the state calls upon us to consider. We all think that it is key from the very start to involve all stakeholders in the planning process, to listen to their concerns, to listen to their opportunities, to bring to them the resources that we think are there, and sit down and hash it out. That process, we think, is key to coming to a point where everybody has ownership, has had a voice, and is able to then commit to action.
But why not just do that as the way you go about developing the plan?
Well, I think we need to have a commitment first to lend credibility to that process.
So a commitment to what? It goes back to my first question. What are we committing to?
If I may jump in. So you're raising perhaps a chicken and egg, which comes first, which is, a decent question. But it's also what's happening right now is we're here asking for your support. That is one thing that's actually happening now. We do want to take this to town meeting and ask for the whole town to support it. But right now we are looking for the selectmen to support this. And that does mean something. It does mean something to us, it means something to the town. I do appreciate, Gus, by the way, you saying, why doesn't the Medfield Energy Committee just pursue this as is without getting a warrant article through? I appreciate that encouragement. I really do. And that means something to us. But we are here right now to ask for your support in this.
Well, I know you are. And what I'm trying to send a signal on is you don't have it for me, but not because I'm against taking action, it's actually quite the opposite. It's because I find, as this is stated here, in the absence of a commitment, in the absence of any specificity, I find this to be another example of the survey question, which is, don't you think we should do something about the environment? Well, of course, people are going to say they would. When you ask them how much are you willing to do yourself to push things forward, you get a different answer. And I'm raising that issue now so that we don't think that we're doing something about the environment when we pass a broad statement without really without getting people to commit to the implications of that statement.
So Gus, can I respond to that?
Yeah.
And because I agree with you on the general principle that for the most part, kind of propositions that might have a place kind of in a parliamentary debating context aren't necessarily a great use of town meeting time.
Correct.
I think for this one, because I've thought about this one, and I could take or leave the preliminary, but in terms of the second paragraph, I think given that if we're going to actually develop an actionable plan and that the plan is not just going to be a much longer symbolic statement, right? Because there's always the risk that you call something a plan, but it's really just a very long statement of opinion and it's not actually a plan, right? If it's going to be an actual plan, it's going to take a fair amount of work. And so, and I could see even, I could see people who share the goals here taking the position that this issue, that the role the town is going to play is so minor, it's not a good use of the town government's time to develop a plan, right? Because you could take the position that this has got to be resolved at a technological level first, and then at a international and federal and state level, and so that for the town to develop its own plan isn't a great use of time, right? You could see someone taking that position that all of the things that we're going to need to do to get there have to be resolved at a different level. Now, I'm not saying I take that position. So I see this less as a pure matter of symbolism, but as some direction, not just to the Energy Committee, but to the rest of town government that's going to have to decide how to spend a finite amount of time over the course of the next year, that we actually do want to spend some of that time developing an actionable plan. And I think we've had, I wouldn't say perfectly analogous articles to this. We've had articles that didn't immediately do anything, but certainly set a direction. So I'm thinking in terms of the creation of the Affordable Housing Trust and the bond for that. We didn't immediately issue the bond, and we haven't issued any money under the bond, but certainly the support of the town meeting, the support of the town gave us a direction that this is something that the people of the town want us to do and want us to spend time on. And I think this is similar in that sense. So I understand your point about symbolism, but I think if there's a debate on this and some people say, look, we don't think we want you to develop a plan, they might just vote no. And then we'll get the direction, not that we don't support this, but that we'd like you to do it kind of, for example, as with the elementary school, we're dealing with the net zero issue there in a specific circumstance and moving in that direction. But we don't really want to spend a lot of time developing an action plan because we're going to take our guidance from the state. We're going to look towards, frankly, whatever innovations are going to be driven by the community choice aggregation program and kind of market forces pushing towards, a greater use of renewable and non-carbon generating energy. So I see this less as a symbolic statement than as a direction from the town meeting, from the legislative body to sort of the executive branch. We would like you to spend some time on this and produce an actionable plan. So I agree with you in concept, but I also think that there's enough work involved in this, and I don't want to pick at a sore point for you, because the other thing I would reference, because I know you're not entirely thrilled at the outcome, is the townwide master plan. When we had a warrant article about that, we had a vote on that to fund it, and so there was a direction to the government, spend time on this. Now, you don't might not like what came of it, but at least we knew to spend time on it, as opposed to, I would be somewhat hesitant to say, just on our own account, to the finite time of our town government, which is pretty small, spend a chunk of time next year on an action plan for net zero without sort of an endorsement from the legislative branch in advance. So that's kind of how I've thought about this article, that this is actually something we want the executive to work on over the next year.
So let me respond to that. Interestingly enough, let me work with the townwide master plan. if I were to come up with an equivalent of that we would have done with the townwide master plan to what I see us discussing here, it would be, we want some people in town to think about what the town should do. And the townwide master plan had funding, there was a specified output, there was a specified period of time, and we understood, I mean, quite aside from what threads I want to pull on specifics, we understood there was a requirement, it was an administrative requirement, if nothing else, to produce that. In a weird sort of way, I would prefer, in this case, a more definitive, more quantified, more specific thing that says, listen, what we'd like is $50,000 to do a study of where we see the biggest opportunities to advance toward the 2050 net zero goals, so that we have some idea whether that's even feasible, or we have some idea of how we fit in. Because to your point, when you gave the scenario about, well, gee, people say wait for the state, I'm thinking, from what I understand, that the issue here with the town is, yeah, we wait for the state to do some of the stuff the state's doing, but some of the biggest opportunities for environmental gains here in this town, that this town controls, is going to be what we can do to reduce the carbon footprint of our vehicles and what we can do to reduce the carbon footprint of our houses. I get that. And I don't think we wait for the state to tell us how to do that. So I'm not against where this goes. But when we just kind of leave it open-ended, I'll have a broader challenge when we sit there and say we're going to commit to achieving 2050 net zero goals, when I've read articles from the CEO of Toyota, who's the company that makes the greatest number of electric vehicles of any company, saying, I don't think we're going to be able to get the infrastructure in place to do what everybody thinks needs to be done with electric vehicles by 2050. When the guy who has every incentive to want to say we can do it says, I don't think it can be done, I'm reluctant to blindly commit to something unless we have a path that's concrete on how we're going to move there, so we can, when we get to 2030, maybe we'll be smarter about 2050. Maybe he'll be smarter about 2050, I don't know. This to me right now is so symbolic and so non-specific that I'm sitting there saying, we're on beach sand here. We're not actually targeting something. And if we want the town to commit, the time to get the town to commit is when you can tell them what it is they're committing to, not merely having them commit at some broad philosophical level. I was informed by this on the net zero emails that we got around the new school, because people were sending, I think we were all inundated with net zero email saying the new school should be net zero. I don't know what you guys did, but what I did with people who sent that in is I sent many of them emails back and said, well, okay, tell me how much you're willing to see your real estate taxes go up to pay for net zero. And the answer I got back is, oh, I never thought about that. I don't know. I have no idea what it costs. Now, Fred came through. Fred brought a Lexington selectman in who said this can be done at no net cost to town, and the problem went away. But you see what I'm getting at? It's like people will say they want something because there's no price associated with it. And I don't just mean financial. I mean personal price. Do we have people here in town who are prepared to say, you know what, I'm not going to drive my kid to school. I'm going to make him ride on the bus so that I don't do 2 round trips a day, wasting all that gas, because we're committed to net zero. Are we actually making those commitments, or are we just saying something so we can all feel good?
I don't know, Gus, but the point of the part of the article I'm focusing on, right, and maybe this isn't specific enough, right, but to me, the action item in this, apart from the preliminaries, is to develop a net zero action plan by March of 2022 that outlines specific strategies and sets measurable, attainable, and realistic interim targets aligned with state and federal goals. And that strikes me as something that, if the town supports it, is useful. If it's specific, it's got specific strategies, it's measurable, and I think it will have a cost. I would assume it would have costs associated with it. And part of what is going to be requested, for example, is here, okay, in order to, as we go forward in our capital budget, we should look at replacing our non-electric vehicles with electric vehicles in the town, right? I think that's probably going to be something that would be coming out of this plan, and there'd be a cost associated with that. And I think then, I agree with you that that's where we'll really find out, right, how serious people are about it. But we don't know until we've put a plan together. We know what the price tag is, and frankly, we know where you get the most value for your money. So maybe the most value for our money is say, look, we're going to increase our budget for vehicles by whatever the percentage would be, 15% or 20%. And the people of the town are willing to bear that cost because they want to move in this direction. And that'll be in the action plan to say, okay, here's our, we have a capital budget, we have vehicles in there. And I suspect that when the Medfield Energy Committee works on this, or if there's going to be a specific committee, a net zero action plan planning committee, whatever we do, we're short a few committees, we could use another one. It may say, okay, here's the vehicles on our current capital plan. This is how much an electric fire truck costs, and this is how much an electric snowplow costs, and this is how much we'd increase the capital budget. And then we think here are the grants we could get if we're doing electric vehicles, and then I think then we have a plan, right? And that has to be implemented in specific votes. But I do think there is value in getting direction from the town meeting as to whether they want us to put the time in to develop a plan.
I'm more aggressive than you are, Mike. I think the authority to approve the Energy Committee putting together a plan by March 2022 rests with us. And I think we could commission that, and we wouldn't need to go to town meeting to get that done. And this goes back to my original question, what's the purpose of this? If the issue is we need the town to tell us whether they want an energy plan or a net zero plan by March of 2022, I don't think we need that. And in fact, I would be more alarmed if the town voted it down. I don't even want the town voting it down without knowing what it is. I'm quite happy to sit there and commission the Energy Committee to put this plan together. Right. I'm quite happy to endorse a plan or an approach to this plan that involves broad community involvement, and I would personally encourage it. I'm sitting there saying it doesn't seem to me that a town meeting is the place that kind of a broad philosophical decision should be made.
Well, I will just disagree on that. I think that's where it should be made.
Yeah, I would
right?
disagree with you too on that.
And I would say, since it's going to be on the warrant anyway, right? So there's only two options, right? To vote this up or vote this down. And I would say for me, if people vote it down, then I wouldn't commission the Medfield Energy Committee to do this, because that would be direction from the town meeting that they don't care to do this for whatever reason. So,
that leaves us, I don't know where you go with that then.
Well, it's going to be there. We can either say we're for it. The only question for us now is, are we going to say we're for it or we're against it? That's the only option we have. It's not going to be withdrawn. It's on the warrant. And so if you're against it philosophically, I have no objection to it. I'm interested to see what the debate will be on it.
So what we can tell the Energy Committee is at town meeting, you will have the public's attention because you'll have selectmen that are arguing opposite sides of this article.
I will say, given the fact that this is going to be outdoors and that it is more symbolic than actionable, I don't intend to speak to it at all. I think if people want to be heard on this, they can be heard on this. I suspect that people will broadly favor wanting to develop a plan. And so I don't see this as something, I'd be more concerned if this is something I thought was going to touch off a 45-minute discussion. Just in terms of the amount of time we have, the fact that you're going to be outside is going to present challenges for people being out of doors. And so I would certainly, maybe I should make my vote in favor of this contingent on the length of the Medfield Energy Committee's presentation. And that,
or the selectmen's response
or
there too.
the comments about it, that the shorter the presentation at town meeting on this, so maybe I'll withhold judgment until I'll have a little timer going, and then we could decide, okay, sorry. But so in general, I think I'm generally in favor of it. I do think for something like this that's going to require work to be done by multiple town boards and committees, I think it is a directional statement from the legislative body about how they'd like various relevant town boards and committees to spend their time over the next years. And I think that is a useful use of, let's say 10 minutes of the town meeting's time.
And it really does kickstart the process, and it's going to be an iterative process year by year. It's going to need to be an evergreen
I just have
approach.
I have serious concerns when we ask people to commit to things without any price tag, without any implications.
Those will
and
come.
then we kind of go with that.
Those
And
will
when they
come.
do, that's when we should ask them.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think
You've got our
we've
inputs.
covered this. I think
Set
we've
aside,
covered this.
We've covered it. Yes.
Thank you to the Energy Committee, Bob or Hilly or Megan. Any final comments?
I just will jump in. There's a question on the
I didn't ask you, Fred, if you had any final comments. I asked Bob or Hillary Megan if they had any final comments. We'll ask you next. But if Bob or Hillary or Megan don't have comments, then Fred, do you have any final comments?
I just realized Chris McHugh Potts put a question in the chat, and I meant to type out the answer and I pushed the wrong button. The answer is on the Energy Committee's website, Chris. Thanks for the question. But I do appreciate your discussion tonight and your attention, and we'll appreciate your support. That's what I'd like to say.
Thank you all. Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Hilly. Thank you, Megan. All right. Our next item, we don't really have anything. Christine reported to me that she doesn't really have anything under COVID-19 status update or the federal funds update or the fiscal year 2022 operating and capital budgets and financial policies. So we will skip over those.
Is there no vote being taken now on this?
Yeah, we'll take a vote formally on this. I think we're all in favor of the community choice aggregation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And two of us are in favor of the
Yep.
of the other article. Okay, we'll take a vote in the list later on. Thanks, Fred. So the next item we have is a request from Eversource for a license to install a new pad mount transformer at the Algonquin gas rectifier site located on North Meadows Road. And this is one we approved this before. This is the same Algonquin gas rectifier that we were talking about before. Christine, what is the?
Actually, let me just recognize Chris Crosby's here from Eversource. So let me just recognize her. Hi, Chris.
Hi, this is Christine Crosby from Eversource.
Hi, Chris. We can hear
How are
you.
you?
Thank you.
So you want to tell us a little bit about your request here related to the pad mount transformer at the Algonquin gas rectifier?
Yes, this is all a part of the project where they're going to install a new rectifier out there. And we did originally get permission from the town for all the work that was being done in the public way. And that was approved at a public hearing last October 20th, 2020. And that was for all the conduit within the public way. And then this particular form is for a transformer that has to be installed within property off the public way. And it's property that's owned by the town. And in order for us to install the transformer, we need to get permission from the town to be able to put that in there and maintain it. And this transformer would be right beside the rectifier, which would provide the electric service to the rectifier.
Did you say this is on town-owned property?
It's property owned by the town, but it's not within the layout of the public way.
I thought it was down by the river. I didn't realize it was on town-owned.
The existing rectifier is down by the river, but they're relocating. They've relocated it already. I mean, it's the new rectifier is installed, but it's not energized yet. The old rectifier is still in place, but the intention is to energize the new rectifier once we get the okay to put the transformer in to do that.
Is it down by, along Route 27, down by the Charles River? Because that's not town-owned land, if that's where it is.
It's down along Route 27, and it's off to it's in an area where you can drive in off of this road, which I believe may have been like an old public way.
It's the old hospital road down to Death Bridge that's now gone, but that's state-owned land in that area.
Okay. We were told by Algonquin that they've already installed the rectifier, and they've already installed the transformer base in order for Eversource to install the transformer. And I was told that they got the approval for that from the town.
No, I definitely, we had the hearing on the work in the public way last fall.
Yeah, on October 20th, yeah.
And so, I mean, so wherever this is, you think this is on town land? Mark, have you looked at this?
No, I have no idea.
All right.
But all I can say is if it isn't, then the action's a nullity. There's really no downside. It's up to Algonquin to do their research and get the permission from the correct landowner.
I was told by Algonquin that they got the permission from the town to install the rectifier, which is in. The bollards are up around it. The concrete base is there in order for Eversource to place the transformer. And this is like the final piece of the project. But everything else that Eversource has already obtained is all the work that needed to be done in the public way, which we petitioned for. It was approved at a public hearing on October 20th in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
When the time comes for Eversource to do the work, we will go to Medfield DPW and get all the necessary street opening permits, trench, whatever, any kind of conditions that the DPW would have on this. We would get all that at the time that we are ready to do the construction. And that's all been approved already by the town. This is just the final piece that once you come in off of that road, off the public way, there's a roadway that goes in. And I think it's like, it used to be formerly like, I don't know if it was the old Route 27 at one point. I'm not quite, but I have photographs I could send, but I can't send them to you like right now tonight, but I did go out and take some photographs and everything's in.
I recall we had a discussion about this a couple of months ago when this came up with Algonquin, because we were trying to be sure that we understood where that pad was. I think it's the same issue you're raising, Pete, is it actually our property or not? And I thought that the upshot of that discussion was that we had figured out where it was and we determined that it was on town property. But it was us winging it in a sense in that meeting. Do you recall that?
I recall this generally. I mean, I don't recall that.
What it was is we were trying to picture, there's equipment that's there now that you can kind of see, and I'm trying to remember whether it was, like on this diagram, it's clearly on our side of the Charles River.
Which diagram are you looking at?
The first of the, there's actually a couple, but it's the first of it's a line drawing of the map and where the installations are. There's a cathodic unit.
Are you looking at the work up in the right-hand corner? Are you looking at work order 2398970?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. That's it.
Okay. Are you looking at page 1, 2, or 3?
Page 1.
Okay. Page 1. Pretty much everything that's shown on page 1 is the work that's in the public way. That from the transformer that's going in the public way, which was approved, going across the street down, and then it goes down to a point of pickup. And I see there's like a road, like a little roadway there, looks like a driveway maybe, and that shows a transformer. So if you look on the second page, it shows a little more detailed information about the transformer. Do you see that on the second page?
Yeah, I'll take, yeah.
Okay, and then on the third page, excuse me, it shows the transformer, and then it shows the conduit from the transformer, roughly 5 feet to the rectifier. Now, if you look at this picture on the page 3, do you see like the area where it shows the Charles River?
Mm-hmm.
And you see where it says pole number 10/188-1X?
Oh, now you're getting out in front of me here.
You see the Charles River?
Oh, the little triangle.
Yep. And then above it says 10/188-7X.
Yep.
That, in that location there is where the existing rectifier is. And that rectifier was being fed from a pole line, a pole line going through the woods to get to the transformer. And there were a lot of issues that came up because of the pole line, accessing the pole line, being able to do repairs. I believe that there was some sort of an incident that happened that this pole line starts actually in Sherborne and then continues on into the woods through Medfield. So the plan is to get those poles out of there and still maintain a feed to that rectifier. And originally, the feed was going to come from the transformer that's shown like up near the roadway, and they were going to feed it all the way down to the transformer by the Charles River. But then they decided to move the rectifier out of that area completely and place it up near the road, closer to the roadway where the transformer is, where the transformer is going.
Chris, is that the triangle with the 4 in it?
The triangle with the 4 in it is the transformer,
Oh, okay.
and the circle is the rectifier pad. But I have to say this, when you go out there, the rectifier pad is where the transformer is, and where the transformer is going is where they show the rectifier pad. But this is just like an approximate sketch. It was drawn up, but it's already physically in. The rectifier is in where that triangle is. Then 5 feet away from it is a concrete base where we will place the transformer. And we need to get permission from the town to place the transformer to energize it, because, we need to be able to, install it and maintain it, in the future.
So
And,
the only issue
and
we
they
have here,
they did put the bollards up in front of it, and they did everything, I guess, that was required. All the work is done. This is just like the final piece of the project.
so Pete, your only issue is this on state property or town property? It's not,
Well, yeah.
it's not a question of challenging the technical design.
No. Actually, when I was on the zoning board of appeals, they came to us and asked us for permission to do something similar to this. And it didn't dawn on me at that point as to whether or not it was on town land or not. It was just
Right.
an issue under the zoning, whether they were entitled to do it. And I was interested that they were actually electrifying, I think, the passage under the river to protect it, basically.
And the tough part.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Sorrell.
I might suggest that it's not shown here, but that's the reconstruction of 27. I'm guessing it's a pretty wide road layout in that area, far exceeding where the paved surface is, so that it could well be on town land.
So I just pulled up, Chris, it's Christine. I just pulled up the documents from the October 20th meeting. And I believe this is within the right of way still. Mark is correct. It's a very wide right of way there. So this is at the entrance, very close, as Bill Massaro correctly pointed out in our Q&A. This is very close to the entrance to the DMH land where the cemetery is. So this is, I think it's actually within our right of way. So
That was kind of what I thought we concluded before. It stuck in my mind that it was close to the cemetery. I'm looking at Bill's comment, though.
I think it's within our road layout, though. That's why they need permission from us.
So even though there's not a road there, it's within the layout of the road.
Within the layout. So they need our permission in order to install anything within that right of way.
Right. All right.
And even if it isn't, we don't probably have a problem giving them permission if it's the state land.
Right. It's not
You can
Well,
take them after.
really good.
When 27, as with most Mass DOT or Mass Highway projects, when they laid out that new 27, it was way over designed. It's a huge layout.
All right. Any questions, guys?
So
Any more questions, Pete?
I didn't have any questions to start with. It sounds like the only issue, it sounds like we could approve it because we don't have any reason not to approve it. It just seemed, if you hadn't asked the question, Pete, I would have just assumed we were good. And I'm thinking we maybe are good, otherwise Algonquin wouldn't have come to us in the first place, but
Yeah, I mean, it's not really our problem. It's
yeah,
Algonquin's
I was going to say, if it turns out it's not our land and we've said it's fine by us, it's probably on
Very much
Eversource's, just to make sure you know whose land it is on the off chance that,
It won't be the first time I did it, so.
yeah.
Yeah. All right, so is there a motion to approve and authorize us? I don't know who's signing this. Is it all of us or who's
Was it just you, Mike?
authorizing the chairman to sign the transformer license?
Sure. So I move that we authorize the chairman to sign the Eversource license to install a new pad mount transformer at the Algonquin gas rectifier site located on North Meadows Road, as reflected in the submitted diagrams.
Second,
Mr. Marcucci?
Yes.
Mr. Peterson?
yes.
Mr. Murby, yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Christine. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
All right, so the next item here is two issues related to the town meeting and warrant articles. The first one is to vote for us, the Board of Selectmen, to vote and sign and post the annual town meeting warrant. Do we have a motion?
I move that the Board of Selectmen sign and post the annual town meeting warrant.
Second,
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
yes.
And Mr. Murby, aye.
All right, so next is for us to discuss and vote on warrant articles. A couple of housekeeping items. We're not going to discuss tonight Articles 29 and 30, which are the two citizens petitions related to the school. The warrant committee is discussing those again on Monday, and so we'll defer that discussion until after the warrant committee's meeting on that front. We also got additional materials just before the meeting tonight, which we should review, I suppose, but I haven't had time to review it, and I don't know if you've had time to review it, so we'll review that. So we're not going to talk about that tonight. We will definitely get through, to Fred's question, we'll definitely get through Articles 21 and 22 to vote on those. Otherwise, I think we'll just go down in order. I don't know that we need to march. I don't know how long this is going to take, so we'll get as far as we can through these, and then finish up with any we have not covered either next week or the week after, depending on whether we end up meeting next week or not. I think, so to the extent the warrant report goes out, if we don't cover them tonight, we'll just be listed as being heard in the, or having not yet taken a position on them in the warrant. So I'll run through, so the first, let's see, I'll just run through the articles and we can discuss and take a vote on each of them as we go through. So the first one is to accept the annual reports. Any discussion on this?
No.
All right, so Christine, would you like us to take formal votes on each of these?
No, I think you let me know that you'll recommend.
Well, let's just take a formal vote on each of them, and it's easier to do that. If it's easier for the minutes. So the first one, Article 1, is there a motion that we will, in fact, support accepting the annual reports?
I move that we recommend approval of Article 1, accept annual reports.
Second,
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
yes.
Mr. Murby, aye.
All right, let's take now Articles 2, 3, 4, and 5, which are perpetual care, revolving funds, PEG access, and cable-related funds, and elected official compensation. Any discussion on any of these articles, Gus or Pete?
No.
All right, is there a motion that the Board of Selectmen will support Articles 2 through 5?
I move that the Board of Selectmen support Articles 2, 3, 4, and 5, perpetual care, revolving funds, PEG access, and cable-related funds, and elected official compensation.
Second,
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.
All right, now the Personnel Administration Plan, Christine, do we have any significant changes in the plan this year that do not relate to the two collective bargaining agreements that we are submitting for approval to this town meeting?
You have a 2% increase for non-union employees included within this.
Okay. But I don't recall any other significant changes to levels or anything.
No, the only, we made, no other level changes, other than we added the public health nurse within the structure.
Okay.
That's it.
Mhm.
All right, Pete, any questions or discussion on the Personnel
Nope.
Administration Plan?
No.
Gus, all right, do we have a motion?
I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 6, Personnel Administration Plan.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, aye.
All right. So the next one is the operating budget. And so the operating budget that's going to be submitted to the town meeting is the one that the warrant committee voted to support at its, I don't know if it's most recent meeting, but at the meeting where it agreed to the operating budget. I think the open question that we have on the operating budget is just going to be the use of free cash versus ARP funds. And so I think there's about $215,000 in the warrant committee's approved budget that they have coming from free cash to offset the operating budget. And I think that as I understand the warrant committee's position, if ARP funds can be used for those expenses, that they would recommend using ARP funds and not free cash. So I think that's the one open item on the open operating budget. They have voted approval of this operating budget that uses the free cash, but otherwise, I think that's the only open question. Christine, are there any other open questions on the operating budget?
That is the only question.
So the expectation is if the ARP funds are available, then we don't spend town funds. Town funds then drop to free cash at the end.
Right.
We're even the way the warrant committee has set this up. First off, there's no overrides involved with this. Second, that it complies with all the financial policies that we have as they stand. So there's no loose ends like that. Okay.
Nothing at this time.
I don't have any questions beyond that.
Obviously, we've been talking about this budget
Right.
at pretty much every meeting that we've had. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know if there's anything more to be said about the budget, so it sounds like there isn't. So, Gus, do we have a motion?
Yep. I move that Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 7 operating budget.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, aye.
And so Article 8 is the requested appropriations from the Municipal Buildings Capital Stabilization Fund that was created in 2018. These are reviewed as part of the capital budget, so these are all items that are part of the town's capital budget. Given that it's coming from a particular stabilization fund that requires specific town meeting approval, the appropriation is done under a separate Article 8. But these are all repairs, building repairs that have been approved by the capital budget committee. So any questions or discussion on this, Pete?
No.
Gus?
I don't have any. Nope.
All right, we have a motion.
I move the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 8 Municipal Building Capital Stabilization Fund appropriation of $1,090,500.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes,
And Mr. Murby, yes.
So Article 9 is a request to transfer, the amount now is $181,941, which has been received from the Massachusetts School Building Authority for reimbursements for the Dale Street feasibility study. And so this is, and I'm sorry, and then whatever is left, so from last year's emergency repair fund. And so in last year's municipal building stabilization budget, we created, I think it was $150,000 for emergency repairs, kind of as part of our effort last year to spend as little as possible in light of the COVID uncertainty. We didn't know what we didn't know about potential emergency building issues, so we created this $150,000 out of the municipal building stabilization fund, and this is returning that money to the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund, along with the reimbursements we've received so far from Dale Street. As you may recall, the original feasibility study was paid for out of the first year's appropriation from the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund. So this will essentially recycle the reimbursements back into the fund for future general building usage. And Christine, what is the current total on the turnback for the emergency fund, the emergency building fund?
I don't have a total for you. I know we just made an appropriation a few meetings ago, and Amy let me know she's going to have to come to us at our next meeting. So I don't want to give you the final on that until she presents an issue we're having at the library.
Okay, so this is up in the air to be
That
determined.
one's up in the air.
Whatever is left, we will be returning it to the Municipal Buildings Capital Stabilization Fund. So Pete, any questions or discussions on this one?
No.
Gus?
The only question I have on this one is if we needed the emergency repair fund for FY '21, is there any reason why we need an emergency repair fund for FY '22?
Yes. There are issues that come up for our buildings that we did not anticipate. And we don't carry that kind of money within our operating budgets. We're trying to get away from that. And in order to do that, we found this was the best way to do, was to put it in the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund.
So,
For emergency repairs that we didn't anticipate.
right. So, but we can't pull it out. In other
No.
words, we pulled it out last year because you can't pull it out of that stabilization fund unless you vote it. Are we voting to do that again for FY '22?
We are, and unfortunately, at the end of every year, we can't just, we were under the impression we'd be able to carry that money, but we have to return it at the end of each fiscal year
Okay,
and then reauthorize it again.
got it. So it's going in on this article, it's going to come out on another.
It's going to come back out. Yeah.
Okay.
The previous article we voted on had $150,000 in it.
That was part of it. Okay, that's
Yeah.
part of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Ready for,
One of those really quirky municipal finance laws we love.
yeah. We ready for a motion?
Yes.
Okay. I move the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 9, transferring the MSBA Dale Street reimbursement funds along with the FY '21 emergency repairs, balance of the emergency repairs fund money from FY '21 into the Municipal Building Capital Stabilization Fund.
Second?
Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.
All right, so Article 10 is to create and appropriate funds for the creation of a capital stabilization fund. So this would be a stabilization fund for capital that is not covered by the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund. So essentially, capital that's not buildings is covered here. The appropriation amount from free cash is $751,000. We also have a number of unexpended appropriations from past years' capital budgets. It's again, another one of these quirks of municipal finance that over the years, there's various capital appropriations that are made. The money isn't always spent. Sometimes it's because we got a better deal than anticipated. Sometimes because circumstances changed and the project didn't happen. And it's usually at some point it becomes available money to be spent again. Or not spent again, but to be spent for the first time on something else. And with the creation of the stabilization fund, we'd be turning this just back into the general capital stabilization fund. It's about $21,000 in past year appropriations from 2016 through 2020 on a bunch of miscellaneous articles, plus the free cash transfer. Any questions, discussion?
No.
So the only thing I think I've asked this question once before. I just want to make sure that I and anybody who's bothering to listen to this meeting is clear. When we did the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund, we took advantage of the new override that we were allowed to make. And so we created and funded it. We funded that through an override. This time we're creating the stabilization fund. We are actually not doing an override. We're just consciously putting money into the stabilization fund. So where the municipal building fund has this override amount that can be increased by 2.5% each year as a ongoing permanent override, we're doing this without making it an override. We're just establishing it as its own separate stabilization fund.
That's correct.
So taxpayers should be happy to hear that we're not asking for an override on that. We're figuring out how to make it work that way, but that's
Yeah,
where we're
they
at.
should be happy for now and might be unhappy in the future.
Well, so that, actually, that actually is one question, and maybe, Mark, it may be you, is when you establish a stabilization fund like this and you don't do it with an override, you can implement an override to support that fund somewhere down the road if circumstances call for
Yes.
you.
Correct.
Okay. I knew you could increase the amount through that kind of an override. So we could do it down the road if we need to. Right now, we're trying to pay for it as we go.
Exactly.
I think we're trying to do it through a combination of, if we're more disciplined about free cash usage, we can use the free
Yeah.
cash for the capital.
Yeah.
And then it's also a place where we can put money either from the sale of town land or sale of town assets, or
Yeah.
or as we under our capital policies, to the extent we identify additional sources of lease revenue, for example, for the dump, that lease revenue would be, this could be a target for that kind of lease revenue.
Okay.
So it's basically a place to put it that dedicates it to capital.
Okay.
And it would be great if we could never have to fund it with a
Right.
dedicated override. We'll see if that actually happens or not, but at least not for this year.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
any other further questions or discussions, Pete?
No. I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 10, creating and providing appropriations to support the Capital Stabilization Fund.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, aye.
Article 11 is our general capital budget, as approved by the Capital Budget Committee and the Warrant Committee. It includes items that are going to be paid out of the Capital Stabilization Fund, some of which will be paid via borrowing or leasing, some of which will come through the American Rescue Plan Act stimulus funding, some of which will come from the Parks and Rec revolving fund, the Water Enterprise Fund, free cash, and the Ambulance revolving fund and the ALS revolving fund. So there's a number of sources within the capital budget. Again, this is another requirement of our capital policies that we identify the funding source for all of the various capital budget items, and to be as creative and expansive as we can in identifying those funding sources. So I think, as we discussed, for those of you who are watching at home and weren't at the previous meeting, the Capital Budget Committee recommended increasing the amount of this year's capital budget to take advantage of the American Rescue Plan funding amounts, and kind of get caught up on this deficit of capital spending that we've accumulated over the last number of years. So, Pete, any questions, discussions on the capital budget?
I have none, no.
No questions.
All right.
I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 11, the capital budget.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, aye.
And Article 12 is, because under the capital budget, we are leasing certain cars. In order to do that, we need specific approval under a specific statute and a specific warrant article. So this is essentially the authorization to lease the vehicles we're going to be leasing. I think it's still up in the air exactly which ones those are going to be. Christine, do you want to just fill us in on where we stand?
So right now, we're not going to recommend any lease purchases. This article is a placeholder. If for some reason we were not able to pass the capital budget as presented, we would then move to do leases for those vehicles that we identified as emergency vehicles, and those will be public safety vehicles. I'm hoping that everything, Article 11, 10 and 11 move forward, and we can dismiss Article 12.
Okay, well, I'll suggest then we don't need to take a position on Article 12.
Yeah.
Article 13 is a topic of much discussion of late, the water treatment plant bond authorization for our new water treatment plant at Wells 3 and 4 for iron manganese. This has been the subject of much discussion. Pete, anything on this?
No.
Gus?
Nope.
All right, so I think it's been discussed enough at this point. Do we have a motion?
I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 13, the water treatment plant bond authorization.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murby, aye.
All right. Article 14 is the budgets for the Water and Sewer Department that are funded by the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund. I think historically, these budgets were included in the overall town budget, with the sources being the Water and Sewer Enterprise Funds. And I don't know, it was a couple of years ago, Christine, we switched to a separate article for a specific appropriation for the water and sewer budget. I presume that these budgets are supported by the Board of Water and Sewerage and the DPW Director?
They are, and they were recommended passage by the Warrant Committee as well.
Okay. Any questions, Pete?
No.
Nope.
All right, we have a motion.
Move the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 14, the Water and Sewer Enterprise Fund operating budgets.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.
All right. Article 15 relates to the town's ride-sharing, share of the town's ride-sharing funds, which somehow is $1,471 for this past year, which I would have guessed is a lot higher. I don't know, but there was how much Uber riding was
Well,
going.
it's actually, the money is pre-COVID money, just catching up to us. Yeah,
We're going to take a real hit next year.
Right.
exactly. We may not even need an article.
All right. So,
You want a motion?
yeah, what do we do with the $1,400, Christine?
We use it for sidewalk improvements, public works projects.
Great. So
Perfect.
approximately 3 inches of road will be paved with our Uber reimbursement.
There's a certain irony to using Uber payments for sidewalks. It's just something. All right. I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 15, transferring DOT ride-sharing funds.
I'll second that, noting that it's smartphone-based transportation companies.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murby, yes.
All right. Article 16, this is authorizing us to lease the old town dump on North Meadows Road for a solar project. I think at this point, we still need some DEP and state approvals to do it. The land is not otherwise buildable, but what this article would do, if it would authorize the lease for a solar project, and then if we were able to get the dump closed and approvals to go ahead from the state and whoever else has to approve it, we won't have to wait for another town meeting before we put that out to bid and for further work. So questions and discussion on this one, Pete?
It's a perfect use for the, because the landfill has a cap on it, which you can't build anything on, but these sit on concrete pads and don't apparently disturb the.
So the only question I have, this is for you, Mark. This is basically, I think it's a great project. I've assumed we were going to do this probably for 10 years and didn't understand why it took so long. But is there any problem with us being seeking authorization to do something on a piece of property we technically do not have clearance to do something with?
There are programs which as I understand it, which DEP is participating in, whereby contractors will come in and close out your landfill properly as part of installation of a solar project. It becomes a win-win all the way around.
Okay. That's the only question I had.
And I would expect that when we get to this point, not to give them even more assignments, but we'd be looking for advice from the Medfield Energy Committee on how best to proceed. And I think this will be, I think Fred may still be on, this will be an agenda item for this post-town meeting to have a general discussion about these solar projects, how to proceed, so we're kind of all on the same page. And this is one, as even pre-COVID, I think we've all been looking to move along because it is just a big open space of land. It's a great location. I mean, obviously it would actually be nice if you could do something on it. It would be a valuable commercial piece of property from a tax standpoint, but this is also a valuable use for it. And we've taken preliminary steps in the past on this front. When we approved the Aura project next door, they agreed as part of that they would support this and have no issue with it. So hopefully this, as Mark says, this can be a win-win. So do we have a motion?
I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 16, the landfill lease, authorizing landfill lease for a solar project.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Aye.
And Mr. Murby? Aye.
And Article 17, again, this was the topic of discussion at our last meeting or 2 meetings ago, authorizing the lease of the town garage for a solar project. This is the discussion we had with Fred a couple of weeks ago. Any further comment or discussion?
Okay, I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 17, authorizing the lease of the town garage for a solar installation.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murby, yes.
And Article 18 relates to Article 17, which is the authorization for us to enter into a power purchase agreement at either the landfill or at the town garage.
Or any other town-owned land.
Or any other, oh, right, so I'm sorry, that's true. This is broader, this would give us authorization to enter into power purchase agreements kind of anywhere in any buildings in town without further town meeting approval. I think Christine, I think we are required to get town meeting approval for the PPAs, but we're also allowed to get sort of general approval that we can do this. And so we don't,
Mr. Chairman, admittedly, I don't have the most up-to-date draft of the warrant, but mine has a authorization for pilot or tax agreements before that.
It's the next one. We moved, that's
Oh,
Article
flip.
19. Yeah, we flipped them.
Sorry.
So, Mike, in terms of what you just said, did you say we would have to get approval for power purchase agreements?
we would not have to get approval going. So this would authorize, we'd have town meeting approval to enter into power purchase agreements on other town-owned lands or buildings
Right.
without further town meeting
Okay,
approval.
so it's a blanket authorization for us to do this on town-owned land wherever we see it suitable.
Correct.
Okay.
Any comment or discussion?
None here.
Okay, I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 18, authorizing the Board of Selectmen to enter into town garage solar landfill power purchase agreements, as well as on any other town-owned land or buildings.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes.
So I was going to skip 19 and 20 because I think Pete is recused on both 19 and 20, so I thought we'd skip to that, to the end. Although given the distance here, I think you're already recused. We're so far away. There's no place else to go. So but we'll come back to 19 and 20. Because 19 relates to the Kingsbury Club and 20 relates to Hinckley South. So now we're getting up to 21, which is the community choice aggregation, community choice aggregation article that the Medfield Energy Committee discussed earlier tonight. I assume there's no further discussion? All right, Gus?
I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 21, Community Choice Electricity Aggregation Article.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murphy, yes.
So Article 22 is the article requesting that, or directing the town to adopt a net zero goal and encouraging everyone to take action in the furtherance of the climate goal and develop a net zero action plan by March of 2022. Since I know our clerk will not have an affirmative motion on this, Mr. Peterson, will you make an affirmative motion for the Board of Selectmen to support this article?
So moved, sir.
I second. And Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Marcucci, well, you can actually call the roll.
I can call the
You
roll.
can call the roll, there you go. Yeah, there you go.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, nay.
All right. Good.
Without prejudice to the overall intent behind
Of
the
course,
article.
of course. We don't need the headline, Murby votes to destroy environment.
That's right.
Murby against environment. All right, now we're moving on to the planning board articles. So, which I think are probably less, probably on the lower end of the extreme levels of planning board changes. I think these are pretty modest changes, but starting with Article 23, which is a request to rezone a 37 Janes Avenue from business industrial to business. And it rezones one residential use parcel located in the B1 zoning district to the B zoning district. So Christine, anything on this one?
No, it's the only parcel zoned residential. So the planning board is trying to help the resident out and move this into the surrounding zoning.
This affects one house?
This one, yeah.
I see. All right. And I assume the planning board is in favor of this?
Yes, planning board's in favor of it, and the warrant committee has recommended passage of all the zoning articles as well.
Okay. Any comment or discussion?
Nope. Move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 23, rezoning a parcel on Janes Avenue from business industrial to business.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes.
All right. Article 24 would amend the zoning amendment table of use regulations to prohibit establishment from solely selling vape and tobacco products and paraphernalia in Medfield. So I assume this means that it can be sold, but at stores that are not vape-only stores?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. And Mark, this,
Actually, there
this
had been some off and on inquiries from people that wanted to put these in, and so it was felt that we needed to address it unambiguously.
mhm.
It's-
So does this include like this would be like a pipe store or a cigar
Yep,
store or something like that?
anything that's pretty much exclusively tobacco as is defined here.
So this is designed to encourage Cumberland Farms to introduce vape products?
Well, they're already subject to licensure under the Board of Health, and I believe it's actually declining as they're not used, they drop off, or they're more restrictive. But what Cumberland Farms may or may not be able to do, this basically is to say that there's not going to be any primary purpose tobacco type facilities or vape facilities.
So when we were dealing with the marijuana sales issue, we had to make provisions for where a store could be located, and it was with the idea it would be exclusive. This is something we're handling in the opposite way.
The marijuana legislation is unique unto itself. There's all kinds of particular controls and constraints that the legislature imposed on those. So that's a unique situation. This is just regular zoning of a business.
Okay.
And so this is prohibiting stores that would prohibit
Sold.
minors from entering. Right, because it's prohibiting adult-only retail tobacco or vape stores. And it's limited to those in which the entry of minor persons under the minimum legal sales age is prohibited at all times.
Yeah, if you don't enact this, I believe, I don't have the zoning bylaw in front of me, but I think you would then fall into general retail sales.
Okay.
And you wouldn't get the kind of restricted results that are desired here.
Okay.
But I mean, I guess, is this, and pardon my ignorance on this, I mean, is this category kind of legal euphemism for something else? I mean, the only thing I could think of would be like a pipe bar or a cigar,
Hookah.
It's frankly, it's driven by the Board of Health and their concerns about accessibility of tobacco products.
And I think it was especially focused on the vaping stores that are selling only vape products that have been popping up all over the place.
Yeah, the question I had, if the adult only stores are not allowed, that's not the same as saying that vape and tobacco products are not allowed to be sold in Medfield. It's basically saying vape and tobacco products must be sold in stores that sell other things, and minors do have access to those stores. Is that the practical effect of this?
The Board of Health, as you alluded to earlier, I think, like Cumberland Farms, has separate licensure authority and restriction ability, and they've been progressively tightening that up as time has gone on. So I don't frankly know what the current status is, but they've been pretty restrictive.
I mean, just to play devil's advocate, right now, you can buy cigarettes in these stores and minors can go in them, and we deal with that. So the only issue here incrementally is around vape products. And they, in the same way that the sales of tobacco would be restricted, presumably that same sort of restriction would occur in those stores for vape products. We just don't want adult-only vape and tobacco stores showing up.
Correct.
Correct.
All right, I think I understand.
It may be an imperfect solution, but the point is it's better than the current situation.
do we know how many of, and I'm in no mood or inclination to second guess the Board of Health at this point after the last year, so I'm inclined to be in favor of this, but,
This is not sponsored by the Board of Health. It's actually sponsored by the Planning Board. I don't know if the Board of Health has weighed in on this with the Planning Board.
There was some back and forth, and what actually prompted it was several inquiries going back to pre-COVID from people who wanted to start businesses like this in town. So the planning board discussed it. I assume they got input from the Board of Health, but it was determined that we didn't want those type of establishments.
Is Cumberland Farms or the convenience stores, are those places not allowed to sell vaping paraphernalia? I have to admit, I've never looked to see if they have it. I don't know. Is it a separate?
It's at least subject to an age restriction, and I don't know frankly whether they're selling this stuff otherwise or not.
I think like you, Mike, I apologize for not having done the legwork on this one to understand the rationales. I would assume that the planning board thought this one through. Not sure where the Board of Health, where they come out. I guess I would be okay just deferring the vote on this.
Yeah, I would defer the vote on this. I mean, I can't say I have any particular brief for having one of these, but I don't know what. The only thing that comes to mind is, and there's not that many of them, but you do see occasionally the cigar bar, pipe bars, and I don't know if we'd want to have one of those or not in town, but I don't know that it would present the kinds of issues that would prompt us just to say no to it in its entirety. I don't know.
And in some towns, there are actually just vape shops.
Yeah,
alone.
yeah. And it may be that you're not able to slice it so finely. But I'm inclined to defer, just because I guess I want to hear from the planning board on it.
Yep.
All right, Article 25 relates to food trucks and the licensing of food trucks in town.
So this will allow businesses that meet the criteria to allow a non-permanent food truck to be in their parking lot during the day, or allow them to, I think, one of the barbecue trucks was at Park Street Books earlier this year, so it allows businesses to have them on site.
So under this, the applicant would, in that case, would be Park Street Books, would be applying for a permit to have a food truck.
Correct.
And so that would then go to the planning board for approval, or?
The planning board would have approval on this, and they would determine based on parking, noise, traffic, whether or not it should be allowed in that by permit.
But it sounds like it would be a blanket authorization. So if Park Street Books wanted a food truck, they could go to the planning board, they get an approval, they're allowed to have a food truck there. They might need separate regulation from us or from the Board of Health on the specific, but planning board wouldn't be involved in approving each time.
No, it's a special permit. They could impose whatever conditions they felt were necessary.
Yeah, the explanation on this actually says that this doesn't affect one-day events. So if you have a food truck come in for a particular day, that's not the issue. Probably the closer existing example would be the hot dog stand that's always at Will's.
Yeah.
It's an accessory use, basically.
Yeah. Christine, has there been any comment from the established restaurants in town, one way or the other, about this?
I don't know if they attended the public hearing for the planning board. I'd have to go back and watch it. I didn't hear any objections in talking with Sarah about it, but I don't know if they were present at the meeting.
Good. I mean, my sense is that this has worked well. We're helping some businesses, so I'm inclined to go along with it. I just want to make sure that that there's not something out there that we didn't hear.
Yeah. No, it seems to be a good thing and additive to the breweries and additive to some of the other places, and generating foot traffic is probably good for everybody.
Yep.
I agree that it's a good thing to have. I'm just wondering whether these people actually then pay into the meals tax fund that we get a share of. Do we know that?
Assume they'd have to.
I would have to ask Mark that. I would
Well,
assume.
they definitely have to pay
Yeah.
meals tax. I don't know,
Yeah.
frankly, how that's handled beyond that point.
I mean, they're licensed businesses with the state, so they have to pay taxes on their sales.
Ready for a motion?
Yep.
Okay, I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 25, authorizing food trucks and mobile food vendors as changed in the zoning by the planning board.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yeah.
And Mr. Murphy, aye.
Okay, Article 20, so we have to 26, which is, let's see, it would allow the zoning board of appeals to review and approve on a case-by-case basis via a public hearing, the encroachment of covered or uncovered decks, porches, et cetera, into the required front or rear setback via special permit. The current process requires a variance, which has strict statutory requirements, which cannot typically be lawfully applied since most deck or porch extensions are for more functional and subjective purposes. So essentially, this would change. We did this on something else, Mark, right? A couple of years ago, we've changed it from, maybe we went in the other direction. We essentially changed it from a planning board variance to a ZBA approval.
We allowed the building commissioner to make some of these calls on pre-existing nonconformities, like if you have a lot that is too small, but all the other requirements are met, what's being proposed doesn't have any effect on the nonconformity. We've given the building commissioner authority to do that. So that's the only thing I can recall. I could be just missing something. But this is flexibility because special permits are much lesser standard than a variance.
Before that, Mark, the ZBA had to pass on all those findings that the building commissioner now can make.
Yeah, right.
But it sounds like this one would also require the ZBA approval.
Well, right now they need a variance, and that's a statutory standard that was indicated is virtually impossible to satisfy. So if it's opposed by an abutter, it's not gonna be defensible legally, whereas a special permit is much more flexible. It's a lesser legal standard as well.
Okay. So this essentially gives people a little more flexibility to put in decks and porches.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, frankly, what happens a lot of times is somebody along the way didn't get careful and get it surveyed before they put it in, and somebody inherits something that's encroaching, and now they're stuck with it. What are you gonna do, make them rip it down? So,
There are certain areas like the Marlin Road, Blacksmith, Colonial Drive area was originally a 20,000 square foot zone. Now it's a 40,000 square foot zone. So when I was on the ZBA, we constantly got people from those neighborhoods looking for findings that there wouldn't, what they wanted, the work that they wanted to do wouldn't be more non-conforming.
Well, you brought that up. So what's going on in my head is I'm thinking back to the LCB changes that were made that I think we all accept, at the time we made the zoning changes, they were, it was just viewed as, hey, it's a recommendation, we did it, and then all of a sudden we got balled up with the LCB. I'm now wondering whether there's any situations where this could be a problem. Because you were talking about Marlin Road, and we currently have a current proposal for a half-acre lot, which was never built on, that is before the Affordable Housing Trust. And now I'm wondering whether a piece of this will have that kind of an impact on that.
It looks like it's about a 6-foot change.
Right.
you've got a pretty strict parameter built right into the bylaw. And we may have a flexible zoning Board of Appeals right now, but historically, we've had some very strict zoning boards of appeals that took the approach that the law is the law, and even if nobody opposes it, if they can't make out the criteria for variance, they don't get it. So this again provides flexibility.
And what recourse I guess the people aggrieved by this would be the neighbor who now has a porch heading in their direction that they don't prefer. I mean, what recourse would they have beyond the Board of Appeals?
You can appeal a special permit if you can, you know, the specific criteria that have to be satisfied. And if they're arguably not satisfied, you can certainly challenge that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little sensitive to this particular lot because you may recall, we adjusted the right-of-way of the pipe coming up from the tubular well field, and at the time, I hadn't appreciated that it was two separate lots. I actually thought it was a matter of them wanting to take a small house, probably take it down, and then centrally locate a larger house. So my thinking at the time was all around allowing that to be, you know, used more flexibly. And instead now what we have is a situation I know the neighbors are not at all pleased with. So I'm a little cautious about this one in light of that.
Do you want to
This one?
I would prefer to defer it. I don't want to go against it. I think I hear what Mark's saying. All of the things being equal, I think giving people more flexibility to do what they want on their own property is where I lean. On the other hand, that LCB situation sticks in my head about something that, up until that, I had just previously said, look, if that's what we're getting as a recommendation, this is an area I don't understand very well. So I would suggest we defer on that one. But that's not to say I just need to.
Yeah, no, I think it's
Comes around it.
worth thinking about. We have time before town meeting, and you know, I think to the extent our views have any relevance at all, it's even more marginal on these kind of planning boards.
Right, okay.
Would it be helpful if I have Teresa James is the current chair of the planning board? It'd be helpful if I invite her into our next meeting and she can give a quick review on these.
Yeah, I would like that, sure, yeah.
I'll send that off to you, and I can also send you, I know she's done a video PSA with Medfield TV. I can send you as well, that she did a summary of each article as well.
Yeah, I think I watched that one. It was, yeah, that's how I knew about this stuff, but then
Okay.
I'm connecting
I'll
it
ask
to
her to
the
come into
dots.
the next meeting. If we can go back for just one moment, I just want to clarify, I was able to reach the Board of Health agent. And it may not change your decision or make you vote tonight. But she did clarify that the Board of Health only licenses businesses in Medfield to sell vape products if they are a 21 and over store. So that is limited to just liquor stores in town. And the current one, she believes, the only one that has a license for vape products is Bullard's.
But if that's the case, then that runs counter to what this article's saying, right?
Well, I think this is saying that there won't even be that.
It won't even, yeah, then there won't be any other outlet for them.
Right. I mean, it sounds like they'll still be able to license existing multi-use businesses to sell vape products, but there won't be tobacco-only 21-plus stores.
And Bridget also editorialized and said she would be surprised if the Board of Health did not support banning all vape products from any and every store in town. So I think you have their support on the article.
They have the power to do that.
Well, no, that being said, Cumberland Farms and other towns has initiated litigation. I'm not sure what the status of it is, but it was as a result of crackdowns in a number of other towns on selling those products. I believe that it's still pending in court.
Not to change your mind tonight, but just to give you a little more information while it was fresh.
Thanks.
Well, yeah, if Teresa's gonna come in, let's defer, and we'll defer 27 and 28 to, we're skipping 29 and 30, so 31 is to amend the stormwater regulations bylaw for the MS4 permit. And this is, we've already done this, right? This is just changing the bylaw. We're already required to do this, right? This
We're
is,
already required to do it, and we're obligated by June 30th to present these updates to the bylaw.
okay.
So actually, I was going to go so far as to recommend, where we don't have a choice but to adopt this, to include this on the consent calendar this year.
It's fine for me.
Fine by me.
So do we favor this in the consent calendar, Gus? Do you have a motion?
Sure. Not to put it on the consent, but just a motion to
Motion in
recommend.
favor of it, and Scott can decide to put it on the
Yeah,
consent.
yeah, okay. So I recommend that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 31, amending the stormwater regulations bylaw for the MS4 permit.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murby, yes.
This may well be the longest consent calendar article in
That'd
town
be a
meeting.
good thing.
We,
know.
we cut down considerably from what the consultant was proposing in the first place.
Increasing the cost of my warrant report.
All right, we have a request from the Planning Board, the Concom, and the Historical Commission to adopt a scenic road designation for Elm Plain Farm, Nebo Streets in Millbrook Road. It gives the Planning Board jurisdiction over the removal of any public shade trees or existing stone walls in a public way designated as a scenic road. The purpose of the act is to protect the character of historic local roads by preventing the removal of key features, significant public shade trees, and historic stone walls. Does that mean that insignificant historic shade trees can just come down? Debate over the significance of public shade trees. So essentially, this gives the planning board some regulatory authority over stone walls and significant public shade trees. Any comments or discussions or?
No.
Only question, Christine, have you heard any pushback from anybody who lives on any of these streets?
I have not.
So just FYI, the kicker is within the public way bit. So if you've got some of the older roads in town that do not have layouts, and we had this in, we actually had a case in Norfolk Superior Court, on Nebo Street, I think it was, where it was determined there was no layout, so the stone walls were not in the roadway, and we had no authority over it.
Okay. Ready for a motion?
Yes.
Okay, recommend the Board of Selectmen, I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 32, adopting the scenic road designation for Elm Plain Farm, Nebo Streets, and Millbrook Road.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murphy, aye.
All right, so 33, 34, and 35 are articles we've put on the warrant, requesting approval of collective bargaining agreements, retroactive payments under collective bargaining agreements for the police and fire department, and a retroactive frontline employee stipend for COVID-19 for employees who came in and continued to be interacting with the public between last March and June. We've already approved these, so I'll take these three together. I assume we're all still in favor of them, having already voted. So if we got a motion to reflect the fact that we will favor Articles 33, 34, and 35.
I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Articles 33 for retroactive collective bargaining agreement with police, 34 retroactive collective bargaining agreement with the fire, 35 retroactive frontline employee stipend.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murphy, aye.
All right, 36 is appropriation for a prior year bill. These are always fun. This one might be the two smallest ones that I recall. One from FY16 for $165 and one for FY 2020 for $177.08.
I recommend the Board of Selectmen approve Article 36, appropriating funding for two prior year's bills, FY16 in the amount of $165 and FY20 in the amount of $177.08.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
I mean, you didn't even want to ask what they were for.
We'll take it out of the lift.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
Mr. Murphy, yes.
And the free cash one we don't vote on. So let's circle back to 19 and 20, which are the two that P will be recused from, and we can cover these.
Good.
All right, so Article 19 relates to pilot agreements, payment in lieu of tax agreements with respect to the solar installations on the Kingsbury Club and the Medfield Town Garage. And Mark, anything on this?
No, because it requires a legislative vote because it impacts on tax revenue.
Okay. Christine or Nick, anything on this?
So I would just like to point out that this also includes the potential for new projects. And the reason why we've included that is so that if we had somebody who came in with the power purchase, who came in with the pilot agreement, we would not need to wait an entire year, which is what has happened with the Kingsbury Club. So it would be nice to have that authorization so that we can provide a little more flexibility and get our revenue generating a little more quickly.
Right. Essentially, we don't have to wait for a town meeting to start collecting
It's a
taxes.
similar kind of broader wording that we have to the power purchase agreements.
Right.
Exactly.
Let's see, and so Pete, you're recused on this one?
Yeah.
So I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 19, the solar pilot agreements for the Kingsbury Club and the town of Medfield landfill and the Medfield Town Garage, as well as any other solar energy systems to be sited at other locations in the town of Medfield.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
And Mr. Murby, aye.
And Article 20 relates to Hinckley South and covers the transfer. This relates to the proposed development on the Hinckley South property for which we awarded an RFP, I don't know, a month ago or so. In the course of discussions and getting feedback from the neighborhood at the Affordable Housing Trust meeting, and then in looking at the plans, I think there's a general desire to move this development a little closer to the Council on Aging and add a couple of units. The original proposal was for 24. For 20, this would bring it to 24. It would add an additional affordable unit as a result. So from the Affordable Housing Trust perspective, it would essentially enable us to achieve our safe harbor certification beginning next May with 2 8s. So we're anticipating that for next year, the number of SHI units required to achieve safe harbor will be 22, up from 21, because what we expect to happen with the census, if the federal government ever releases the results of the census, and if there's 6 affordable units there, then you get 2 8s and 8 and 8, and 22, and we create an additional buffer zone and area between the proposed development and the existing neighborhood on Bishop Lane. The Council on Aging had given up some land for use in the original RFP, but this would require some additional land in order to support a new layout that the developer has put together. So Christine, that's kind of what this article does, and I see that you and Sarah have put in a lot of the details on adding this chunk of Council on Aging land, but other updates on where things stand with this particular issue and article?
Council on Aging has voted to fully support the article.
Terrific. And where are we with the discussions with the developer?
It depended on our last discussion was seeing how quickly we could move this article forward and get it on the annual town meeting. So now that we've accomplished that, I will go back and have a further discussion with him.
Okay. Gus, any comments or? Nope. All right, I'll take a motion.
I move that the Board of Selectmen recommend approval of Article 20 in regard to the redesignation of land associated with the Hinckley South project.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
And Mr. Murby, aye.
All right. Well, Christine, we got through all of them with the exception of the ones we're going to discuss next week. So that's pretty good. Or
I'm very happy.
yes. And so then that raised, well, let's get back to the other items on our agenda. I don't think anyone's necessarily sticking around for the other stuff. And if you are, I apologize for not taking up, but I don't know that anybody was here for that. And then we can talk about our schedule and whether we want to meet next week or not. All right, so the next item is to approve a contract with Rona Cairns for clinical oversight and supervisory services for employees of Medfield Outreach.
Correct. And there was a copy of the contract included. Kathy McDonald had approached Mark and I about utilizing this service. Our former director also had a clinical consultant that she used as well. So this is actually a different clinical consultant than we've used in the past. And Mark, you approved the contract?
I drafted it. It's my contract.
There you go.
It's only like 10 hours for $1,000. So
Yes, it's very small.
So I did have a question, only because it was so small. I was wondering why we were contracting for it, but is this intended to only be a 3-month contract, or is this a quarterly? Will this be a continuing? It's not because I'm concerned about the cost. It was such a small amount of time and a small amount of money. I was trying to understand whether this is a one-time issue that has to get fixed or if we're doing quarterly contracting.
Kathy McDonald, I've just made a panelist. She's actually here, so she can answer that question directly.
Good.
Hey, everybody, how you doing?
Hi, Kathy.
The contract is small, Gus, for a couple of reasons. One is I can see where we are in our fiscal year. And, I figured that we would put a new contract forth in the next fiscal year. And basically, I was holding off on this clinical consultant until I felt like we had the appropriate caseload to warrant her time. And, with COVID and kids being out of school, we saw the clinical sort of caseload ramp up pretty significantly since school has been increasing in hours as the schools tend to be our major referral source. And we are very busy now. And I thought it made appropriate timing to bring someone on for that extra level of clinical oversight and, good liability, good for the department, good for growth, good for clinical consulting, et cetera.
So Kathy, the question I was trying to understand is this person someone who's bringing a unique oversight skill, or is this literally a capacity expansion for you?
No, this is someone who brings the skill. She is a clinical consultant. And this is what she does. She does this for a variety of other youth and family service departments in other towns as well, and has been recommended.
She'll be reviewing your processes or practices as well. Okay.
Exactly. And as we think about expanding, whether that be through group service or other things, she will bring some expertise to that as well.
Okay.
Pete, any comments or questions? All right, we have a motion.
I move that we approve, hold on, I gotta get the item here. We approve the contract with Rona Cairns, licensed clinical social worker, for clinical oversight and supervisory services for employees of Medfield Outreach as described in the agreement for services.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.
Next is a request to approve the.
Thanks, Kathy.
Everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Kathy.
Kathy.
Request to approve the Massachusetts School Building Authority budget revision request number 3 for the Dale Street Elementary School project. This is essentially additional money related to services associated with the archaeological due diligence for the the Massachusetts Historical Commission review of the site. So it's a $40,000, $926 request. I think this was approved by the building committee at the last meeting. I don't think I was there. I missed that one actually, but I think it was approved. So any questions, comments, discussions, or a motion?
So I move that we authorize the chairman to sign the revision request number 3 for the Dale Street School project with the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the amount of $40,926.68.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.
All right, next is a request to approve a request for the Medfield High School volleyball banquet at Medfield State Hospital. Do we have a date on this, Christine?
So they have given us 3 or 4 dates. So if it's okay with you and you're okay with them moving forward, Nick and I will work with them on a date that fits best with some of the other activities that we've already approved on the site.
Okay. We have a motion.
I move that we approve the request for the Medfield High School volleyball banquet to be held at the Medfield State Hospital on a date to be worked out with Christine based on availability of the hospital.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murby, yes.
All right. Finally, we have a recommendation from the Board of Water and Sewerage for a water conservation restriction, odd even watering, due to a state declaration of a level 2 significant drought in the southeast region. I had a meeting with Mo on Friday, and he was mentioning this was coming, and it was in the middle of the nor'easter when it had been raining, and it was snowing at the time, and kind of joking, it's the perfect time to declare a drought when it's raining, and you get an inch and a half of rain and snow, but obviously it was a noticeably dry March and April, and the drought measurement numbers don't lie. So this might be the earliest watering restriction I remember, at least in a while. Any questions, comments, discussion on this, Pete?
No.
Gus?
If I understood Mo's comments, this is not a mandatory restriction we're putting on ourselves, but it's, I guess, the responsible thing to be doing at this point in time. And then if things get worse, we may have tighter restrictions that could come in. But yeah, my view is if that's what Mo thinks we should do, it makes sense that we should do it.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay. I move that we accept the recommendation from the Board of Water and Sewerage for a water conservation restriction of odd even watering due to the state declaration of a level 2 significant drought in the southeast region.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci,
Yes.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
and Mr. Murphy, yes.
So we do have a question from Hilly Passas asking, how do watering restrictions affect car washes that kids' organizations need to run for fundraising? I think it's not a mandatory restriction,
It
right?
depends the level you're at when they have if it gets really strict, then they're prohibited.
Right, but I don't think that's true at this level.
No, we have a sliding scale in the bylaw.
This is a tier 2. I guess, do we have, I know one of the dangling items, but pre-COVID was rationalizing our many requests for car washes at the townhouse, which we never got around to before all that stuff just stopped. But I guess from Hilly's question, there are in fact car washes planned, maybe just not on our
Radar.
I don't have any car washes that are planned for the townhouse currently. I don't know if Hilly has some elsewhere. We are working on the car wash policy before school comes back, and we start to get those requests usually around June and July for the fall. But I don't have any currently.
Yeah.
We could adopt a policy that you can wash the left side of a car on odd days. And the right side.
Depends on your license plate number. If you have an odd license plate number, you
license.
can wash
That's
it
a
on.
better,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a better idea.
Well, I guess the answer as to this restriction, it won't make any difference. So
Right.
it's not prohibited. So if there are scheduled car washes, carry on. So, all right. Consent agenda, nothing. Town administrator updates, Christine.
I don't have any this evening. Thank you.
All right.
We've been too busy putting the warrant together to focus on anything else.
So for right now, we're scheduled to meet May 4th and May 11th. I know we have some appointments on May 4th already. And Christina, is the plan for the warrant, for the warrant report to go to print this week?
We're planning on going out by the end of the day tomorrow.
Okay, so that'll be out. So there's no,
Yeah, I don't have anything.
whatever we say or do will not be reflected in the warrant report here on out. I guess the question is, we're going to meet twice. I think we'll have to meet at least twice before town meeting. And the question, are we better off doing it May 4th and May 11th as planned, or are we better off doing it April 27th and May 4th and not meeting on the 11th? I mean, I'm happy to do any of the above. I also suspect that if we decide on the 27th and the 4th, we'll meet on the 11th anyway, because something will come up in the advance of town
Right.
meeting that will require us to get back together. In particular, I mean, the one thing that could throw a wrench into some of the budgetary work, so if we get guidance that is unexpected from the Treasury Department on the use of the ARP funds. So what do you think in terms of meeting dates, Pete?
I'm flexible with whatever you want to do.
Gus?
No, I'm flexible as well. The only thing is, I think if there was a date that we weren't going to do it, for the very points you made, there's already stuff scheduled on the 4th, and undoubtedly by the 11th, there'll be a reason for us to meet. I would think it would be the 27th that we would skip.
Well, let's stick with the 4th and the 11th then, and then maybe we can see if Teresa can come in on the 4th, and we can try to cover the remaining articles. By that point, the warrant committee, I think, will have finished its recommendations. So let's stick with the 4th and the 11th, and then we'll have our usual meeting in advance of the, at 4:45 before the town meeting. All right, Selectmen reports, Pete.
A couple things, Energy Committee meeting and Medfield Foundation meetings. The Energy Committee continues to be very active, as you have seen here. Medfield Foundation had Medfield Outreach come in and report as a Medfield initiative at its meeting. Townwide Master Planning Committee on Thursday this week. That's it.
And I don't have a lot to report, other than I think we all were copied. There have been a number of thoughtful emails that have come in related to articles and other issues that are going on here in town. And even if some of the viewpoints aren't ones that I share, the effort and the thoughtfulness that's gone into those messages I appreciate and have tried to, I think I've gotten back to about 2/3 of them so far with an attempt at equally thoughtful things. And then the other thing that I will observe, Christine, you may have insight on this, but my observation is that the Medfield Police Department have been much more active with their radar checking. And I don't know whether they're just sitting there trying to trap me as I drive down Harding Street, because they're there a lot. But I've been very careful. I keep it at 30 miles an hour. But I did want to observe that I've seen a lot more presence of Medfield police cars at appropriate times of the day on appropriate roads, setting up appropriate monitoring, which I'm sure can have some positive impact on how people are driving through town. So that's a good thing.
I think that's post-COVID monitoring, and as well, we have a lot more cars returning to the roads than we've had recently. So,
So I don't think I have a particular report. I actually don't think I had any meetings for the first time in a while since our last meeting. I did just want to kind of bring up with both of you, kind of as we're looking forward to our schedule after town meeting, if there are kind of non-time sensitive but important strategic issues that we need to discuss as we kind of move out of crisis mode and back into normal mode. You know, one of them that I've identified is have a meeting with the Medfield Energy Committee to talk about solar projects and strategy and all the rest of it. And that may be folded into the action plan, but I think with hopefully a couple of more coming due, or we're gonna be able to push ahead over the next year, I would like to have a meeting with them to talk about it. And if there are other issues that you have in mind where it would be good for us to devote a meeting to one of those topics, I'd like to get those scheduled in. People are going to be probably traveling and going on vacation again this summer, but I'd like to make good use of our post-town meetings before we get into next year's budget cycle. I will let you know that I will be putting on the agenda item a few tweaks to our financial policies. Nothing significant, but I think with a few years' experience, there's a couple of things we need to clarify in there, so I'll schedule a meeting for that. But again, if you have other items, other committees we want to meet with, we kind of been meeting with committees on Zoom, but you know, we've been driven by events and trying to manage everything through, and I think it would be good to schedule something. And the other thing I do think we ought to talk about, and I don't know that we need to impose upon the committee to come in and talk about it, because they've done a lot of extra meetings, but we should probably have a discussion amongst ourselves about the Townwide Master Plan. Once the Townwide Master Planning Committee finishes the work it's doing. And they're welcome to come. I just don't want to make a command performance. They've been a lot. To just talk about what the next steps are going to be from our end on that as an agenda item for kind of the June, July.
Yep, I think that'd be an excellent idea. They're just finishing up the last couple of departments or groups that they've been meeting with to make sure that they're going to pick up their parts of the plan.
Yeah, and I had a meeting with Mo on Friday to talk about a few things, and I think there's going to be a couple of proposals and things coming out of that as well that I'll put on for an agenda once he and I have had a chance to talk about what it might look like, so we can set the table for those discussions. But otherwise, it's good to be back in person. Stay tuned for what the attendance will be like for May 4th. It'll depend on health guidance and the rest of it, but it would be great to at a minimum, get Bill Massaro back in here and maybe some additional people as well. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Marcucci?
Aye.
Mr. Peterson?
Yes.
And Mr. Murray, aye.
And thank you so much to Medfield TV and Amanda for
Yes.
making this happen.